You've found your way to whispers of Asia, where forgotten rituals breathe and grief echoes through hollow rooms, where every silence hides a name and every shadow remembers the dead. Tonight, we follow the sound that never stopped. In a remote village draped in mist and memory, a bell tolls from a mountaintop temple. It has rung every night without fail since the hour a man died and left his wife behind. No hands pull the rope, no wind stirs the chime, yet it rings. This is the story of a widow who built her life around that sound, a woman whose sorrow became prayer and whose love refused to let the dead rest. They say grief fades with time, but what if it doesn't? What if it becomes ritual? What if it becomes a haunting? Light your lantern, breathe slow, and listen, because some bells ring not for the living, but for the love that never left. The village was built on silence. Perched between two hills and blanketed in mist that never quite lifted, it lay like a forgotten bowl carved into the earth, filled with rice fields, moss-covered shrines, and breath that barely dared to speak. Roosters crowed soft, not sharp. Even children played like ghosts. And in the heart of that stillness rose the old temple. Its wooden frame leaned into the fog like a man too tired to stand straight. Ivy crept through the stone cracks. The wind there never screamed. It whispered, always. And on the 21st day of the Hungry Ghost Month, at the exact moment the last red thread snapped from the fingers of a woman's hand, the temple bell rang. No one was near it. No monk pulled the rope. No hand touched the old wooden striker. Still, it rang. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder wearing silk, not loud, not demanding, but final. The woman who heard it first was named May. She was kneeling in her garden, bare knees against the cold dirt, hands deep in the root of a dying chrysanthemum. Her husband's breath had grown shallow since morning. She had left him inside with a candle and her promise to return before he slipped away. She did not make it in time. The chrysanthemum did not bloom. The bell rang, and she knew. She knew before her knees rose, before she dropped the trowel, before the second toll followed, deeper than the first, the kind of sound that doesn't echo, but sinks. She ran barefoot through the narrow path between the garden and the house. The candle was still lit, the flame still. The body in bed was warm, but not breathing. And the bell rang once more. May did not cry, not that day, not the next. Instead, she listened. The widow wore white. In the traditions of the old village, the traditions her mother kept like knives wrapped in silk, a mourning woman must not wear color for 100 days. She must not sing. She must not cook anything with garlic. And she must not speak the name of the one who passed. Instead, she must light incense at dawn, sweep the threshold at noon, and kneel when the bell rings. But no one said what to do when the bell never stops. It rang again on the second night, at the same hour, with the same cadence, as if it had memorized her grief. On the third night, she knelt at her doorway, not in prayer, but in waiting. She watched the distant silhouette of the bell tower through the fog. The wooden shape swayed, but the air was still. No monk, No hand, no movement. Yet the bell rang. On the 5th night, she brought a bowl of rice and a stick of sandalwood to the edge of her threshold. She whispered not to her husband, but to the bell, "I hear you. You are too late." Then she placed the offering down, bowed 3 times, and closed the door. By morning, the bowl was empty. The stick burned clean to ash. The neighbors began to whisper, "She's still feeding him. It's not her husband anymore. The bell, that's not for the living." The old woman across the road left folded paper charms on May's doorstep. One of the village boys drew a boundary line of salt near her gate and never stepped past it again. But May did not chase the whispers. She counted the tolls. Every night at the same time, the bell rang 3 times. Never 4, never 2, always 3. 3 for the past, 3 for the breath that stopped, 3 for the promise she made on the day they wed. "I will walk with you, even if it means walking where no light falls." On the 13th day, she returned to the temple. The bell tower loomed higher than she remembered. Its wooden beams cracked, its rope frayed and knotted with mold. The monk who once tended it had died years ago, and the new caretaker was rarely seen. Yet the bell rang. She climbed the steps, palms against stone that pulsed with cold. The door to the bell chamber was ajar. Inside, there was no striker, no wind chime, no prayer flag, only the bell. And beneath it, dust, undisturbed. She stood there, arms folded, silence pressing against her ribs. And then the bell rang again, right beside her. It did not move, it did not swing, but it rang. Not like iron, not like bronze. It rang like a throat too full of sorrow. That night, May did not return home. She slept at the foot of the bell. No dreams, only the sound. In the days that followed, she began building an altar beside the garden gate, not in her home, where memories softened, but in the open, facing the temple. The altar was simple: a raised stone slab, a clay jar of ashes, 2 bowls, one for rice, one for tea, and a single red candle lit every night before the bell rang. Some said she was mad. Some said the ghost of her husband had not moved on. Some said the bell was broken, cursed, possessed. But none of them listened the way she did. None of them noticed how the sound changed, how by the 25th day the toll had a pause, a breath, a tremble, as if the bell mourned too. On the 30th day, when the moon was thin and the air too cold for August, May stood in her doorway wearing her husband's old shawl. The bell rang 3 times, and she whispered, "I'm still here." The candle on the altar flickered, though there was no wind, and for the first time, after the 3rd toll, a 4th sound followed, soft, like fingers tapping the wooden frame of her door. She opened it. Nothing, only mist. But the candle was out. May did not close the door that night. She sat by it, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the horizon. She waited, not for answers, not for sleep, but for the bell. because now she knew it was no longer ringing to mark his death. It was ringing to bring her closer, to remind her, love, like sound, does not fade. It echoes until someone listens all the way through. The wind changed after the 30th night, not in direction, but in sound. It no longer whispered through the bamboo as it once had, no longer rustled the rice leaves like fingers brushing silk. Now it moved like breath, slow, deliberate, waiting to be heard. And it always came just before the bell rang. May noticed it first at dusk, when the shadows began to stretch like long prayers across the fields. She stood barefoot on the threshold, hands stained with candle ash and tea, watching the mist coil between the houses like something alive. The altar by her gate had grown. What began as a single stone slab and a bowl had become a small shrine of silent routine. Each morning she swept away the dew and lit incense. At noon she replaced the rice. At dusk, she placed folded red paper beneath the candle, symbols for longevity, for remembrance, for love that does not rot. And every night, after the bell rang, something would be gone. Sometimes the rice, sometimes the tea, but always the paper. It never burned. It simply vanished, as if taken, as if accepted. And the candle never flickered until after the bell tolled. By the 34th day, she added a photograph, not of her husband's face, that would break the rite, but of his back, the only picture they'd ever taken on their wedding journey to the mountain temple years before the sickness began. He stood on the edge of the mist, shawl pulled high, his body looking small and brave against the sky. She placed it in a bamboo frame beside the candle, and when the bell rang that night, the photo turned, ever so slightly, toward the sound. She told no one, not because she feared ridicule, but because speaking of it aloud might break the spell. There are truths, May believed, that only the silence understands. So she kept her silence. Even when the widow across the rice path, old Lynn, stopped her by the well and asked if she'd been hearing the bell. "It's been tolling every night," Lynn whispered, voice brittle like fallen leaves. "But the monks are gone." May said nothing. Lynn leaned closer. "It rings for you, doesn't it?" Still, May did not speak. Lynn's eyes softened. "He must have loved you very much." And with that, the old woman turned away, not asking for more. But love alone doesn't make a bell ring without hands. That thought returned to May on the 39th night, when she woke not to the bell, but to silence. No sound, no wind, no frogs from the marsh, only the pulse of her heart, steady and lonely against the weight of the world. She rose before dawn and went to the altar. The rice bowl had not been touched, the candle had gone out, and the photograph was missing. Not stolen, not blown away, removed with care. She ran to the temple steps as morning broke. The path was damp and cold, overgrown with roots that clawed at her ankles. The bell tower stood as always, silent, looming. She climbed. The air inside was different, thicker, as if she had stepped into someone else's breath. And there, beneath the bell, resting against the old wooden support post, was the photograph, upright, untouched, but no longer showing his back. Now it was blank, only pale parchment inside the frame. the ink gone. That was the first time she wept. Kneeling on the cold floor, the photograph cradled in her hands, she cried not from fear, but from understanding. He was fading, not in her heart, but in the space between worlds. And the bell was his voice, calling through the veil before it thickened too far, calling for her. She lit incense there beneath the bell, 3 sticks, one for the day they met, one for the last thing he said, "Don't follow, just listen," and one for the night the bell began to ring. She whispered into the smoke, "I haven't stopped listening." And the bell rang, once, soft, like a breath. She returned home with the photograph frame in hand, its emptiness now a kind of presence. She did not place it back on the altar. Instead, she wrapped it in silk and laid it beside her bed, as if his absence was something warm enough to keep near. That night, she placed a folded letter on the altar. No name, no date, just a memory. You used to hum in your sleep. You'd wake yourself and ask if you were dreaming. You were always dreaming, even when awake. She sealed it with wax and sandalwood ash. In the morning, it was gone, and the candle burned all the way down. On the 42nd night, she left nothing. No rice, no tea, no paper, just silence. And when the bell rang, it was different. Slower, heavier, 3 tolls and a 4th faint, like the echo of a forgotten heartbeat. It came from beneath the earth. That night, the wind did not blow. It whispered her name. Once, May. And then, silence again. She went to the shrine and sat with it through the night. No candle, no incense, only her presence. And when the bell rang at 3:13 a.m., as it always did, she whispered one word back: "Stay." In the days that followed, her routine softened. She no longer swept the altar each morning, no longer replaced the rice with fresh grains. Instead, she began to watch the altar, as if it would do something on its own. She began to believe it might. Then, on the 50th night, she awoke to footsteps on her porch. Not loud, not heavy, soft, like bare feet on old wood. She rose and opened the door without hesitation. No one was there, but the bowl on the altar had been filled with something new. Not rice, ash. Fine, white, bone-sweet ash. And pressed into it a single burnt red thread, exactly like the one that had snapped in her fingers the day he died. May did not panic. She did not cry. She knelt before the bowl and placed her hands over the ash, letting the warmth settle into her skin. And for the first time in 50 nights, the bell did not ring. Only her breathing filled the dark. And then, in the silence, she heard something stranger than any toll. A voice, her husband's voice, from within the ash, faint, echoing. "You're closer now." She looked toward the temple, its silhouette rising above the fields like a shadow held up to the stars. And she knew the altar was not hers anymore. It was his, and it was speaking. On the 51st night, May stopped leaving rice. She stopped placing tea in the bowls, stopped folding the red prayer papers. She no longer lit incense or swept the stone clean. The altar, once a place of devotion, had become something else entirely. It had begun to respond. And she feared what might happen if she continued feeding something she could no longer name. Instead, She stood at the edge of the altar with her hands empty. No offerings, no voice, no movement. Only her breath against the cold. That night the bell rang again, but something was different. The sound wasn't just metallic, it was wet, like something dripping between the chimes, like the sound of something crawling out of a well. When the third toll faded, she did not move. She simply closed her eyes, stood still beneath the porch beam, and whispered into the empty air. "If you're not my husband, you cannot have what's his." The silence that followed was too long to be normal. It was a listening silence, a breath that didn't belong to her. In the morning, the bowls were full again, but not with food. Inside them were feathers, thin, white, and frayed, each soaked in something dark, not blood, not ink, something older, a stain that didn't come from the world she knew. And laid across them was a comb, her husband's comb, the one she had buried with him. She touched it. It was warm, still shaped to the curve of his hand. But as she ran her fingers along the teeth, something pierced her palm, a splinter, too sharp for bone. She looked closer. It was not wood. It was something that had grown, something new from inside the grain. A hair. Not hers, not his, and not entirely human. That evening May did not return to the altar. She sat indoors with the door closed, the shutters barred, the candle unlit. But still, the bell rang, 3 times, and again after a pause a 4th toll, this one so low it shook the floorboards. The village dogs howled that night, not at the moon, but at the bell. And one by one they stopped, not because they were soothed, but because they were answered by something older than the mountain itself. May woke at dawn to find something scrawled on her door. It wasn't paint, it wasn't chalk, it was ash. Letters, a name, her husband's name, written backward, as if the world beyond was calling him the wrong way. She scrubbed it off with vinegar and salt, her hands shaking. When she turned to check the altar, the bowls were gone. So was the comb. So was the shrine itself. Only a wet black mark on the stone remained, shaped like a mouth, open, waiting. The silence after that night was worse than the tolls. No bell rang for 3 nights. No wind came down from the mountain. The village grew colder, but no one lit fires. Everyone waited, as if something was approaching that none of them wanted to name. On the 4th night of silence, the bell rang again, but this time it rang just once, a single toll. It came at 2:59 a.m., not 3:13, earlier, unexpected, and followed by knocking. May rose from her bed with candle in hand and approached the door. The knocking came again, soft, steady, polite, not like a ghost, not like a stranger, but like a husband returned from work. She opened it. No one stood there, only fog. But just beyond the edge of the steps, barely visible in the mist, stood the comb, upright, balanced on its teeth, as if placed by hands that did not wish to be seen. She stepped forward once, and the bell rang again. Only it didn't ring from the temple. It rang from the ground, from beneath her feet. She froze. Something whispered from below. "You stopped feeding me." May whispered back, "You are not him." And then the voice replied, "Not yet." She slammed the door and did not sleep. Instead, she searched through the old ritual books her grandmother left, pages written in brush strokes and blood, with poems masked as spells. One passage struck her. It read, "When the dead are called too often, the living must pay. When the bell rings without hands, it rings with hunger. And when offerings vanish into air, the air is no longer empty." She remembered how the rice disappeared, the tea, the letters, even the photo, all fed to something she now feared she had invited, not her husband, but something that wore his memory. On the next day, she visited the monk. He lived in a house that wasn't a house, more a room with paper walls and a bowl for prayer. He was old, nearly blind, and mute. But when she arrived, he was waiting. He opened the door before she knocked. He nodded once and gestured for her to sit. She held out the comb. He took it, and when his fingers touched the grain, he recoiled. He pressed it to the altar behind him and poured oil on it. Then, with a flint, he lit it aflame. The wood screamed, not cracked, it screamed. A sound like bone being boiled, a sound like grief breaking open. The monk turned away and began to write in the ash that fell. 3 symbols. Then he wiped them clean and started again, over and over, as if the words themselves were too dangerous to be left still. She watched him, and at last he stopped. He pointed to her, then to his own chest, then to the mountain. He drew a bell. He drew a heart, and he pointed to the comb again, now blackened. Then he wrote, slowly, "He loved you," but something else heard it. It answered. May left without speaking. There were no more questions to ask, only one truth she could no longer ignore. The altar was no longer hers. The bell was no longer a symbol. The offerings had fed something too long, too well, and too often. Now it was hungry for more, and it wanted not rice, not tea, but her. That night May stood at the edge of the field and faced the temple. Fog drifted low. The stars hid behind smoke. The wind did not breathe. And at 3:13 a.m., the bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times, then a 4th, so low the air seemed to kneel. And May whispered into the air, "I will not feed you anymore." The wind replied, "Then come instead." The monk had always been a shadow in the corner of the village, seen but never heard, like an old tree that watches but does not bend. He came down from the temple only once each moon, and only to gather herbs from the edge of the forest, or to sweep the forgotten graves at the edge of the village where no flowers ever grew. Most people had stopped speaking to him years ago, not because he was unkind, but because he was silent. And silence unnerves those who fear being heard too deeply. But now May needed him, more than she had ever needed anyone since the day her husband died, more than she had ever needed even her husband, because now something was answering her grief, something that wore the shape of love but rang like hunger. And the monk, he had heard it too. He lived in the temple's lowest chamber, far beneath the bell, behind a gate carved from black wood and sealed with twine. The entrance was tucked between 2 banyan trees, whose roots spilled like veins over stone. When May arrived, the monk was already kneeling outside, waiting. His eyes were pale as rice water, and he no longer walked without leaning on a staff shaped like a question mark, bent, old, and full of riddles. He gestured for her to sit. She did. He did not ask why she had come. He did not need to. For a long time they sat in silence. The bell did not ring that day, and for once the absence of sound was not comforting. It was tense, like a breath held too long, like something waiting to exhale from beneath the world. May placed the blackened comb on the ground between them. The monk stared at it, then reached into his sleeve and pulled out a piece of parchment, yellowed, brittle, etched with symbols that shifted slightly when her eyes weren't focused. He unfolded it with care, laid it beside the comb, and pointed to a single line drawn in red. It was shaped like a bell, but not a bell made by men. This one had roots instead of ropes, a mouth instead of a clapper, and inside it a heart, drawn small, beating. The monk traced it with his finger, slow and soft, as if touching something still alive. Then he reached for the ash bowl at his side and scattered a pinch across the comb. It hissed, not like fire, but like breath. Something exhaled through the wood, something listening. The monk turned to May and made a sign across his chest. 3 fingers pressed to his heart, then lifted skyward. She did not know the exact meaning, but it felt like a warning, not of death, but of return, of something coming back that should never have been invited. Then he brought out the bell. Not the bell, not the great one that hung in the tower and rang each night with no hand to pull it. This one was small, palm-sized, bronze, dented and tied with a strip of red cloth so old it was nearly black. He placed it in her hands, then bowed. And for the first time since she had known him, the monk spoke. His voice was brittle, like parchment tearing, yet it carried like wind before a storm. Do not use it unless you are ready to answer what calls. That night May did not sleep. She sat before the old altar stone, now bare, now dead, with the bronze bell in her lap. The moment the clock passed 3:12 a.m., she felt the shift. The air grew heavier. The walls began to creak, not from wood, but from something beneath the floor. The 4th toll came, but this time it didn't come from the temple. It came from behind her house, from the garden where the chrysanthemums never bloomed. She turned. There was someone standing there, not moving, not breathing, not alive. Her husband, or something that remembered how to be him. He did not speak. He only looked at her, with a face she knew, eyes she had loved, and a mouth that didn't move. But the bell tolled again, even though the temple was silent. It tolled from inside his chest. She heard it clearly, metal on sorrow. And then a second face appeared behind him, the same eyes, but hollow. May stepped back into her house. She closed the door without slamming it. She sat on the floor, hands trembling, clutching the small bell. She could not breathe, could not cry. The thing outside knocked once, then again, soft, like love, but each knock shook dust from the ceiling. She rang the bronze bell once. It chimed like silver spun from water, and the knocking stopped. The fog lifted slightly outside her window, and in the distance the temple bell began to shake, but it did not ring. It trembled as if afraid. Then the voice returned, not from her husband, but from the shadow behind him. He opened the way. You kept it open. Now let us in. She rang the bell a second time. This time the fog shrieked, not a scream, but a long echoing cry like thousands of bones snapping beneath the ground. And then the shadow stepped back. Only her husband remained. He whispered her name, May. But it was not longing, it was warning. Then he vanished, like a breath drawn back into the soil. May sat until dawn, the small bell still in her lap. The house no longer creaked, the air no longer whispered, but the silence was full, not empty, waiting. At sunrise, she returned to the monk, but the gate was closed. A string of paper seals fluttered in the wind, each marked with blood. Not red ink, real blood. His. She knew it instinctively. And on the gate, pinned with a wooden nail, was the parchment he had shown her before. Only now, the drawing had changed. The bell no longer held a heart. It held a face. Hers. She fell to her knees, and for the first time, she prayed not for her husband to return, but for the door she had unknowingly opened to close, before it was too late. The wind returned on the 65th night, but it did not carry comfort. It crawled through the shutters like a shiver pressed against bone. It whispered, not in words, but in pulses, matching the rhythm of the bell that had begun tolling again, though now it rang not 3 times, not 4, it rang 13. Slow, heavy. And each time it tolled, the windows of May's home rattled as if the sound itself wanted to enter. She did not count the first few chimes, but after the 7th, she realized something was wrong. Each toll was not simply a repetition. They were changing, growing louder, deeper, older, like the bell was remembering something it wasn't meant to recall. And with each ring came a knock. First one, then another, until 13 knocks echoed gently against her door, perfectly timed with the 13 chimes. Then, silence. May stood barefoot in the center of her home. She did not reach for her lantern. She did not move toward the door. She listened, and what she heard chilled her more than any wind. A breath, not hers, inside the room. She turned slowly. There, pressed against the inner wall, was a handprint. Small, damp, too fresh to be from the past, too cold to be from the living. She didn't scream. She whispered, "You were never invited inside." But something, someone, answered from the shadows. I was never truly outside. On the 13th night, the veil thins. That's what the monk's old parchment had said. The 13th sound is not for the dead and not for the living. It is for those in between. And something was now walking between. At dawn, May found her garden upturned. The chrysanthemums, which had never bloomed, were now open, not in white, but a sickly red. Their petals bled dew that clung like syrup to her fingers. And written in the soil, drawn with something thicker than mud, was a message. You will hear him walk tonight. That day, she did not leave her house. She sat by the door with her back to the wood, the bronze bell in her lap, the old parchment before her, tracing the same symbol over and over, a bell with roots, a mouth, and a beating heart. She no longer needed sleep, only stillness, only readiness. When the sky dimmed, the wind returned. It carried the smell of something buried, ash, char, and the faintest trace of jasmine, her husband's favorite flower, burned into his funeral incense. Then the footsteps began. They came from the fields, slow, deliberate, not like someone walking toward her, but like someone retracing a path they had once known too well. Each step matched the beat of her heart until her heart began to follow it. At 3:13 a.m., the bell rang once, but it did not echo. It was swallowed, as if the world itself didn't want to carry its sound. Then came the second toll, then the third, until 13 chimes passed through the air, not above the earth, but beneath it. And as the last one faded, the door creaked open by itself. He stood there, her husband, no longer flickering, no longer shadowed, but clear. His face soft, worn, eyes dimmed by memory, but not hollow. He did not speak. He only looked at her. But it was the silence behind him that broke her, because in that silence stood something else, a second figure, larger, cloaked in mist, wearing no face, only hands, too many of them, reaching forward. May took the bronze bell in both hands and whispered, "If this is truly you, you will know what I fear." And the thing in her husband's shape blinked once and nodded, then stepped back. But the thing behind him moved forward. She rang the bronze bell once. The house groaned. She rang it a second time. The wind screamed. She rang it a third, and the faceless thing fell to its knees, its many hands covering where a face should be. It made no sound, but something inside May wept, because she understood it wasn't a ghost, it was grief. Old, hungry, fed by too many nights of remembering, too many offerings to the space where absence became ritual, and now it wanted form. She stepped forward, barefoot on the porch, bronze bell in her hand. The thing hissed without breath. She raised the bell, but before she rang it again, she looked at her husband's shape, still standing, and asked, "Are you him?" He shook his head, then spoke, his voice like wind between hollow reeds. "I am the last sound of him, not the man. You rang too long. Now the bell rings without choice." And then he vanished, like a mist exhaled. And the faceless thing? It crawled into the ground, like roots sinking into soil too eager to feed. The 13th night ended with no dawn, just gray, endless gray. And May sat on the threshold, the bell beside her, no longer ringing, only waiting. The bell rang again on the 71st night, but this time May did not flinch. She had learned by now, the first toll was never the one to fear. It was the ones that came after, the ones that buried other sounds beneath them. Because the bell no longer rang on its own. It carried something now, a second tone, a hidden voice, and it was speaking. It began softly, woven between the chimes, too delicate to name. Not words, not breath, but rhythm, a whisper shaped like grief. Each time the bell rang, May heard it more clearly. Not through her ears, but through her bones. It vibrated down her spine, through her teeth, into the spaces between her ribs. A message pressed against the skin of her spirit. She sat in the center of her home with the bronze bell in her lap and listened. And when the third toll came, the whisper behind it grew into a pattern. Not random, not wild, but deliberate. Like someone knocking from inside the bell. 5 times, then 4, then 1. Again, 5, 4, 1, and then silence. May wrote the numbers down. She didn't know what they meant, but she knew they weren't meant for the living. She brought the pattern to the monk's gate. It was sealed. Paper charms dangled like breathless lungs across the wood, and behind them, no sound, no presence, no incense, just dust. She pressed her hand to the gate and whispered, "What does it want me to hear?" The wind answered by lifting the parchment from her hands and scattering the numbers across the stone. When she bent down to retrieve them, they were rearranged. Now they read, 1 becomes 4, 4 becomes 5, then silence. She returned home and listened again. That night, the bell rang 4 times, and after the 4th toll, something else began. Not a whisper, not a knock, but a song. Sung through metal, sung inside her. No lyrics, only sorrow and rhythm. The kind of song you hum for the dead when you're too tired to cry. She lit a single candle. The flame flickered sideways, drawn not by breeze, but by pull. The bell was drawing the world in now, not just sound, not just grief, but her breath, her name, her memory. Each toll was not a cry for attention. It was a thread, winding her towards something old and unfinished. At 3:41 a.m., 17 minutes after the last toll, she heard it, a knock, but not at the door. This time it came from under the floorboards, right beneath where she sat. 3 times, soft, deliberate, and behind it, a voice, muffled, as if calling from behind water. "You buried me wrong." She stood, heart frozen, stepped back from the center of the room, and the knock came again, then stopped. By morning, the earth in her garden had cracked, not wide, but thin long lines like veins running through the soil beneath the altar stone, which had reappeared overnight. Someone or something had placed it back. But now there were carvings in it, etched deep, symbols she did not recognize, except for one, a bell. Inside the bell, a face, her face. She knelt, ran her hands across the surface, felt the indentations hum beneath her fingers, and when she closed her eyes, she heard it again, that voice, clearer now. "You kept calling, I never left, and now you must finish what I could not." She stood slowly, returned inside, brought out the blackened comb, the bronze bell, and the last letter her husband had written before he died, still folded, still sealed. She placed them all on the altar and waited. The bell rang that night, only once, but beneath it the voice spoke plainly, "Dig." May did not sleep. At first light, She brought a spade to the garden and began to dig at the foot of the altar stone. She dug past roots, past soft earth, past clay, until the soil turned gray, like ash, and then she hit something solid, wrapped in cloth, bound in twine. She lifted it gently. It was heavy. She unwrapped it. Inside, a scroll, red ink, black paper, her husband's name written 5 times, each time crossed out except the last, and beneath it, her name written once. She staggered back, dropped the scroll. It landed face up. The ink began to smear, not from water, but from heat rising off the ground. The garden was breathing, slow, deep, as if something beneath it had lungs and was waiting for her to say yes. She didn't. She burned the scroll. At sunrise, the fire hissed like an animal wounded, but did not fight. It accepted. The ash rose, spun once in the air, and scattered toward the temple. That night, the bell did not ring. The village was silent, but the absence was not relief. It was the kind of silence that listens, the kind that waits for you to break it. And at 3:13 a.m., she whispered, "I heard what lives beneath the bell." And from the garden where the altar once stood came a voice that sounded like metal twisted into breath. "Then you are already part of it."
The ghost festival came on the 81st night. The villagers hung lanterns from every doorframe, red ones to honor the family dead, white ones for the lost souls who never made it home. The air smelled of smoke, sugar rice, and sandalwood. Children carried lotus-shaped floats to the river's edge, giggling, their faces painted with ash to confuse hungry ghosts. But May did not laugh. She did not dress in white. She walked to the river alone, carrying only one lantern, not red, not white, but black, trimmed in gray silk, a lantern of mourning, a lantern for one who never truly left. She stood at the water's edge, where the bank crumbled beneath her toes, and lit the wick with a single match. The flame flickered violet. It should have caught yellow, but it didn't. The light inside the lantern pulsed, not like fire, but like a heartbeat. The river had always flowed gently, but tonight it was still. So still, in fact, that when May bent to place the lantern on the surface, she saw her reflection perfectly. Her eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, the black threads in her hair more numerous than gray, and behind her reflection, a second face, smiling. His face, not grinning, not wide, just watching. She dropped the lantern onto the water. It didn't float. It sank, straight down, without struggle, without ripple, swallowed, like an offering. Behind her, the temple bell rang, once, twice, 13 times. But this time, May did not flinch. She turned to face the sound and saw a figure walking along the opposite bank. Her husband, or something that wore him like memory. He didn't approach. He stood beneath a tree where no lanterns had been hung, where no offerings had been left. And he bowed, slow, then raised a hand, holding something, a lotus lantern, burning red. But the flame inside it screamed, a high, shrill, voiceless scream, a sound that peeled back the night and made the stars flicker. She covered her ears, but it wasn't in her ears. It was in her bones. Then, just as suddenly, the lantern burst into a ring of smoke, curling in the shape of the temple bell, and the figure was gone. She returned home to find her lantern waiting at the foot of her door, dripping, cold, unburned, but blackened at the edges. Inside, where the flame should have been, was a single coin. Old, so old the engraving had faded except for the hole in the middle. And around it, carved in the scorched silk of the lantern, were words she had not written. "Your debt is not paid." May took the coin to the altar, now rebuilt a third time, without her doing, and placed it in the rice bowl. The bowl shattered. A thin line of red leaked from the crack onto the altar stone. It smelled of rust, of blood, of time. And then the voice returned from beneath her feet. "You lit the way, now we will follow." That night, the village changed, not in form, but in memory. People began forgetting who lived beside them. Children called their mothers by the wrong names. Doors creaked open and revealed rooms that no longer existed. And always, always, the bell rang. Even in daylight, even without warning. It had lost its rhythm. It rang for itself now. It had become a voice that no longer needed permission. The monk's house burned that week. No one saw who lit the fire. No one wept. Inside the ashes, someone found a single bell clapper, not the bell itself, just the mouthpiece. And on it was a name, May, etched so finely it looked born into the metal. She buried the clapper in her garden, placed a new lantern above it. This one she did not light. She waited, and at 3:13 a.m., the wind did it for her. The flame rose blue, and this time her husband's voice did not come. Instead, another, older, deeper. "The bell no longer rings for the dead. It rings for the door." She spoke aloud finally. "What door?" And the flame in the lantern flared, then drew inward, collapsing like a breath pulled too far. And in the sudden darkness, she heard footsteps on her roof. Not birds, not wind, but bare feet, pacing, and then the bell rang again, from above her. She lit every candle in the house. They all went out together. Then, in the window, her reflection returned, not her face, but the shape of her wedding photo. And beside it, a second image. Her husband, smiling, holding a lantern, burning slow, burning her. The 89th night arrived with no moon. The sky was a blackened bowl turned over the village, its edges frayed by clouds that moved without wind, drifting like folds of damp cloth. Every lantern in the village trembled as if threatened by an unseen breath. Even the dogs refused to bark. May felt it before she heard it. The shift, the thinning. The world had become too light, too hollow, as though one wrong whisper could make it collapse. She stood at her window, watching the fields bend, not from wind, but from footsteps moving through the rice. Soft, measured, remembered. And then she saw him, her husband, standing at the edge of the temple path. For the first time, he was not blurred by fog or half buried in shadow. He was clear, painfully clear. His hair looked as it did in life, neatly tied, a single gray strand at his temple. His hands were still rough from the years of carrying clay pots and firewood. He was solid now, not mist, not memory, but something that remembered how to wear a body, something that had learned from watching her grief. He did not move at first. He only watched her. And May felt her breath shake, because she realized then that she had not forgotten him, but she had forgotten what it felt like to stand before him without fear. There was no warmth in his eyes. There was only longing so fierce it felt like hunger. He stepped forward once. The rice bent around his feet as though bowing. He stepped again. The air behind him folded inward, as if pulled through an unseen doorway. And on the third step, she saw what followed him. A shadow. Tall, human-shaped, but with no outline where a head should be. It stood directly behind her husband, close enough to be a second spine. And each time he moved, the shadow moved too, lagging by a heartbeat, like an echo learning how to walk. May opened her door and stepped outside, barefoot, breath trembling, but certain. The earth hummed under her toes, like a drum stretched too tight. She walked to the garden, to the cracked altar stone where the lantern from the ghost festival still burned. The flame flickered sideways, toward the temple path, toward him. When she whispered his name, her voice fractured the night. "June!" He paused. The shadow behind him leaned forward as though tasting the sound. Then her husband spoke. His voice was exactly as she remembered, soft, steady, holding warmth and sorrow in equal measure. "May." Her knees nearly buckled. The voice was real. The voice was him. But then he said something no living mouth could form. "I saw you praying for me to stay." The shadow's hands emerged then, slow, pale, almost delicate. It rested them on his shoulders, and he did not resist, because it was wearing him, using him, learning him. May shook her head, stepped back. "That wasn't my prayer." He tilted his head, confused, or pretending to be. "You lit lanterns for me, offered rice, whispers, nights, tears." His voice deepened. "You kept the way open." The shadow behind him whispered, its voice a rusted echo. "You kept us fed." The lantern by the altar surged, burning taller, hotter. The flame rose until it shaped itself into the outline of a bell, wavering, trembling. Her husband stepped closer. The shadow stepped with him, and the flame bent in their direction as if pulled. May swallowed hard. "If you are truly June, tell me the last thing you said before you died." Her husband blinked slowly. One breath. Two. Then, "Don't follow. Just listen." Her heart collapsed inside her chest. It was him, at least some part, a shard of him, a memory of him, and the rest was the thing behind him. She took one step toward him. The ground cracked beneath her heel. A fissure spread through the earth, narrow but deep, bleeding warm air that smelled of ash and river mud. Her husband reached out his hand, not pleading, inviting. The shadow's hand stretched above his, longer, thinner, the fingers bending like roots. May hesitated. "What do you want?" Her husband's voice softened. "To return." The shadow's whisper layered beneath it. "To become." She stepped back. The shadow hissed. Her husband did not. He only lowered his hand, the human one, and looked at her with something too painful to bear. Not sorrow, not rage, but regret sharpened into need. "You kept listening. Now you must finish." The bell rang from the temple, once, but the sound was different, broken, as if the metal had cracked. Then it rang again, twice. Then the third time, and the sound split into two tones, metal and voice, a living voice, her husband's voice, crying out through the bell itself, trapped between tolls. And in that moment, May understood. The shadow had not taken him. He had bound himself to the bell, to stay near her, to not pass on. And the thing behind him, it had followed the sound. It had fed on love stretched too thin, too long. Now it wanted shape, her husband's shape. The shadow stepped forward. For the first time it detached from him completely. It walked ahead, toward her.
Its body unfolded like ink spilled on water, taking a form that stretched and bent as though made of breath and bone both. May opened her door and stepped outside, barefoot, breath trembling, but certain. The earth hummed under her toes like a drum stretched too tight. She walked to the garden, to the cracked altar stone where the lantern from the ghost festival still burned. The flame flickered sideways, toward the temple path, toward him. When she whispered his name, her voice fractured the night. "June!" He paused. The shadow behind him leaned forward, as though tasting the sound. Then her husband spoke. His voice was exactly as she remembered, soft, steady, holding warmth and sorrow in equal measure. "Now you ring for us." Behind the shadow, her husband fell to his knees. His hands trembled, his voice strained. "May, don't listen anymore." But she had already had. Too long, too deeply. And now the sound beneath the sound, the whisper in every toll, had taken root inside her. The shadow extended its hand, not to harm, to invite, to complete whatever ritual her grief had begun. May stepped backwards until her spine met the doorframe, then whispered two words that made the fields tremble. "Not yet." And the bell rang once more, not from the temple, not from the earth, but inside her chest. The temple bell had not rung since the night May saw her husband's face fade into shadow. But silence did not bring peace. Silence brought heat. Not the warmth of summer or fire, but the dry, thick kind that clung to her skin like invisible smoke. The kind that made the walls sweat. The kind that whispered, "Something has burned, even if you did not see the flames." She woke to the scent of scorched incense, but her home was untouched. No candle had fallen, no ember had escaped, and yet the entire floor was dusted with a fine white ash, like snowfall from a pyre. She traced it to the back door, past the garden, and up the winding hill to the temple, barefoot, breath held. The temple bell stood still, but the ground beneath it had changed. Where there had once been moss and stone, there was now a circle of blackened earth, wide, perfect, burned into the shape of a bell's mouth. And at its center, a shallow mound, a grave, fresh, still warm. May fell to her knees. The heat pulsed from the soil, rising in waves that made her vision ripple. The air above the mound shimmered, and for a moment she saw it, a face in the heat. Not her husband's, hers. Mouth open, eyes closed, as if caught mid-prayer or mid-scream. Then it was gone. The monk's voice returned to her memory, brittle as rice paper. "He loved you," but something else heard it. And she understood at last that what slept beneath the bell was not a ghost. It was grief with roots. Something born of mourning too long unbroken. Something she had fed. She looked down at the mound. Someone had left an offering on top of it. Not flowers, not coins, but a scroll, wrapped in red twine, still smoking at the edges. She reached for it. The scroll pulsed once, and the bell above her rang without moving. She opened the scroll. There was no writing, only symbols, old, etched deep into the black paper with soot and oil. A bell, a heart, a flame, an eye, and beneath them a final mark, shaped like an open mouth. wide, hollow, inviting. Then the ground moved, just slightly, enough to make the ash tremble and dance across the temple stones, enough for her to feel the breath rising from below, not wind, breath, measured, alive, calling. She spoke aloud, "What do you want from me?" The bell did not ring, the scroll did not change, but her own voice echoed back. Me. Soft, almost tender. Then, finish it. She did not know what it was, but her hands did. They moved without command, pulling the red twine from the scroll and wrapping it around her wrist. She tied it in a knot, tight. The moment it closed, the bell rung again. This time, not a single toll, but a long, drawn-out chime, not metal on metal, but voice on breath. It was her voice, speaking a name she had never said aloud, a name that came from the shadow. As the sound faded, the ground at the center of the burned circle cracked, just slightly, and ash spilled out, not smoke, not dust, ash, thick, wet, clinging. It moved like memory returning, and inside it, half buried, she saw the bell's clapper, the one that should have hung inside the great bell, the one now missing, the one with her name etched into it. She reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the metal, a vision struck her. A field drenched in twilight, her husband standing beside a fire, holding the bell's clapper and carving her name into it, crying, whispering, "I can keep her, just one more night, just one more ring." And behind him, a shape in the dark, watching, smiling, nodding. The pact had been made, not her, him. And the price? Time. Not his, hers. She fell backward, choking on breath that wasn't hers. The clapper rolled from her hand. The ash pulled it back into the earth like a hungry mouth. And then, silence. Heavy. Still. The bell above her finally swung. Once. Twice. But no sound came. It was empty now. The clapper, her name, buried beneath. The bell had become a mouth without a voice, waiting for her to speak it, to give it sound again, to take his place. May rose slowly, stared at the circle, the mound, the burning scroll now vanished. She whispered, "You didn't mean to curse me." And the wind replied in her husband's voice, "I meant to stay." She turned to leave, but the bell rang again. This time, not from the tower. It rang from inside her bones. She staggered, fell, and when her palm struck the earth, it left no handprint, only ash.
Some rituals begin with prayer. Others begin with grief. But the oldest ones, the ones never written in books, never taught by monks, they begin in silence. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something listening. May could no longer hear the bell, not with her ears, but she felt it now, constantly, like a vibration deep in her blood, a phantom chime behind her heartbeat. It did not toll anymore from the tower, because it didn't have to. It lived inside her, and with each breath It whispered a single question: will you finish it? The 10th day after the vision, the ash stopped falling. The sky cleared, the winds softened, and for a moment the village believed the haunting had passed. But not May. She knew the bell's silence was not peace. It was the stillness of a held breath, the hush before a name is spoken that can't be taken back. She returned to the temple steps one last time. The burned earth remained, cracked and warm. The mound had sunk, no longer a grave, but a hollow, waiting. And at its edge, she found a scrap of fabric tied to a rusted nail in the temple door. It was her husband's funeral sash, but now, embroidered across it in crimson thread, was a phrase she had never seen. Love survives what it should not. She entered the temple. It was colder inside than outside, though no wind blew through the open beams. The statues were covered in soot. The scrolls had rotted on the walls. And in the center, laid across the floor where the monks once prayed, was a shallow basin, stone, cracked, still damp. It had never been used in her time. But now the basin pulsed, and inside it floated a single tooth, human, still bleeding. May did not scream. She had passed the point of fear. Now, all that remained was the quiet understanding of price. Something had been promised, and it had not yet been delivered. In the farthest corner of the temple, beneath a broken offering table, she found a bundle of scrolls bound in waxed thread, soaked with time. She lit a candle and unrolled them. Most were unreadable, mildewed ink, torn corners, moth-eaten characters. But one remained intact, written in charcoal and water. A ritual, a merging, a prayer not to summon the dead, but to anchor them, not for their peace, for yours. May read the title aloud. The Binding Bell, to keep what must leave. And her heart stopped for a beat, because beneath it was her husband's signature, scrawled in shaking ink, as if he had written it while dying or while already gone. The ritual had 3 parts. Name the one you wish to keep, not aloud, but written, sealed with breath and blood. Tie them to a sound that will outlive you, a bell, a chant, a song whispered endlessly through sleep. Offer the self, not death, not sacrifice, but memory, the part of you most unwilling to forget. Give the bell what you will not let go, and it will carry them for you. But it will ring until the debt is paid. She dropped the scroll, stepped back, because now she understood. Her husband had bound himself to the bell to stay near her, but the ritual had not finished. He had done the first 2 steps. He had named her, carved her name into the clapper, let the bell ring in her place. But the 3rd step, the offering, had never been made, because he had died too soon. The bell was left hungry, open, incomplete. And so it had fed on her grief instead, for years, every tear, every whisper, every act of remembrance. It had been a substitute,
a slow, accidental ritual, completed not by design, but by devotion. And now it wanted to end. And to end, it needed the final piece. Her. Not her life, her memory. What she would not let go. The last part of her still calling his name in the dark. She fell to her knees. He didn't mean to curse me. The air shifted, and a voice answered, not her husband's, but the bell's. He meant to love you, and love done wrongly becomes binding. May wept, softly, and as her tears touched the stone floor, they turned to ash on contact. She looked up, at the bell above, now cracked, now hollow, waiting, its clapper still gone, her name still buried. She stood, took the funeral sash from her pocket, wrapped it around her wrist, then dipped her fingers into the basin and pressed the wet ash to her forehead. She whispered, "I finish it. Let him go." The wind rose from nowhere. The bell shuddered, not from force, but from relief. And then the ground opened, just slightly, and the clapper, blackened, hot, rolled toward her across the stone. She picked it up, pressed it to her chest, and spoke his name one final time. The bell rang, not loudly, but deeply, once. Then silence. And for the first time in 89 nights, her husband did not appear, not in shadow, not in smoke, not in fog. He was gone. Truly. And the bell had nothing left to say. May left the temple at dawn. The sky was clear. The ash had stopped. The earth no longer warm. And in her hand she held only the scroll, now blank, the ritual complete, unwritten, unneeded. She walked home alone, but her shoulders did not bow. Her hands did not shake. The silence that followed was not grief. It was release.
The bell no longer rang, not from the temple, not from beneath the earth, not from inside her chest. It was over. But the silence it left behind wasn't clean. It clung, like smoke on old fabric, like perfume after the body is gone, like memory refusing to die. May had finished the ritual. She had released him. She had burned the last thread that tethered his name to this world. And yet, on the 92nd morning, she found herself kneeling at the foot of the old altar, the one now cracked and empty, whispering his name as if it still mattered. John. It came out like a habit, and habits are prayers, whether we mean them or not. The garden had not grown since the burial. No buds, no leaves, only dry stalks and cracked soil. The earth felt hollow, not dead, not cursed, just quiet, too quiet. She sat for hours beneath the eaves of her home. No bell, no voice, no pull, only wind, and the faint memory of weight, the sensation of being watched, now missing. She had always feared the haunting. Now she feared its absence more. At dusk, the villagers lit their oil lamps. Children laughed again. Dogs barked. The rice fields swayed freely. The temple bell no longer interrupted the night, and no one spoke of it anymore, as though forgetting were the final offering. But May remembered, and memory too is a kind of altar, a place you return to even after the incense has gone out. She dreamt that night, for the first time in weeks, not of her husband, but of herself, standing in the temple, alone, holding a lantern that had no wick, only smoke coiling endlessly inside. In the dream, she walked toward the bell. It hung still, its mouth yawning like a cave. She climbed inside, not afraid, not weeping, just still. And as she sat within it, she whispered the words she never had during the ritual. I release myself, too. And the bell echoed once, not from her voice, but from her silence. She awoke before dawn, the sky dim, her skin damp. Something had shifted, not in the house, not in the wind, inside her. She rose and dressed in white, not mourning white, but cleansing white, the kind worn for final rites, for endings that are also beginnings. She lit a stick of incense, not for him, for herself, and as the smoke curled upward, she finally spoke the words that had waited too long in her throat. I loved you. I lost you. But I kept holding your ghost to keep my hands full. I release you. I release the ritual. I release the need to be haunted. She bowed once, twice, 3 times, and on the third bow, the incense snapped in half. The ash didn't fall, it rose. She stood in the center of her home where once the bell had echoed inside her chest. She placed her hand to her heart. It was quiet, but not hollow. There was a weight there, not sorrow, not longing, just stillness, like the first moment after a prayer, before the world answers. The scrolls she had taken from the temple lay folded on her table. She took them one by one and burned them, not as a curse, not as a ward, as a gesture of closing. Each turned to smoke. The smoke drifted upward and vanished, and nothing replied. No wind, no whisper, no toll. That night, she did not dream. She simply slept. And in the quiet of her breath, something bloomed in the garden for the first time since he died. A white chrysanthemum, whole, soft, silent. In the morning, she found it glistening with dew. She did not cut it. She did not place it on the altar. She left it to face the sun, because it was not for him. It was for her, for the part of her that had been buried beneath the bell, for the voice that had been drowned in ritual, for the woman who had waited long enough to be released. And so, with the wind behind her and silence at last within her, May whispered her final prayer. May I never need to call you again. And the earth answered with nothing, which, for once, was enough. May thought it was over. The bell had fallen silent. The ritual was completed. The garden had bloomed. But healing, like haunting, does not follow a straight line. It returns in echoes, in pulses, in dreams that don't know they are dreams. On the 96th night, she woke with blood on her hands. Not from a wound, not from violence, but from the dream she could not escape. She had been inside the temple again, standing beneath the bell. It swayed above her like a breathing thing, and from its edges, blood had dripped. Thick, slow, warm. Not pooling, not spilling, bleeding. And when it fell on her face, it whispered, "You opened me." She lit every lantern in the house, but light could not undo the sense of something unfinished, something that had not been buried, only quieted. She stepped outside. The night was windless. The village slept. But above, high on the hill, the temple glowed faintly, not with fire, but with red light, as though the stone itself had begun to bruise. She climbed the hill, slowly, barefoot. Each step felt like it pressed against memory, not earth. And when she reached the top, she saw it. The bell, still cracked, still motionless. But beneath it, the stone floor was stained, not with ash now, but dark red. It had bled, in waking, in silence. She stepped into the bell's shadow. Her heart did not race. Her breath did not catch. She had seen too much to fear, but something inside her stirred, something she thought had already passed. The sound beneath the sound, the echo that lived inside her. She pressed her hand to the bell. It was warm, not metallic, living, and it pulsed beneath her palm like a second heartbeat. She whispered, "I released him." And the bell responded, "But you remained." She staggered back, because it was true. She had broken the ritual, unbound the dead, but she had never let go of herself. She had mourned for so long that the mourning itself had become a home. And now the bell was no longer calling for him. It was calling for her. A memory came back sharp and sudden, the scroll from the ritual, the third step. Offer the self, the part you cannot release, and the bell will carry it forever. She had thought that meant her husband, but it hadn't. It had always meant her grief, and she had never truly let that go. The blood beneath the bell shimmered in the moonlight. It was not her husband's. It was not the shadow's. It was hers. The part of her that had been bleeding every day since the first toll. Unseen, slow. And now it had surfaced, not as a curse, but as a choice. She sat beneath the bell, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Then take it. Take the part of me that still waits, still listens, still aches." The bell did not ring. It breathed. Warm wind circled her. Ash lifted. The red glow faded. And then a single drop of blood rose from the stone. It hovered before her face, then fell onto her chest just above her heart. It did not burn. It sealed. She gasped, because the silence inside her finally left, like smoke rising from a snuffed candle, like the final breath before sleep, and in its place a hush, still, steady, whole. When she opened her eyes, the blood was gone, the bell was cold, and the air felt clean. But more than that, she no longer belonged to the morning. Not the sound, not the shadow, not even the memory. She stood and bowed to the bell, not in reverence, in gratitude, for holding what she no longer needed. As she turned to leave, she glanced back once. The moon had risen full behind the tower. The bell cast no shadow. And for the first time since the death of her husband, May did not hear anything follow her home. Not a whisper, not a toll, not even her own name.
Some echoes return even after the sound is gone. They linger in the walls, in the way wood creaks at night, in the way your name catches in your own throat when you whisper it to no one. May had quieted the bell, had buried the ritual, had cleansed the temple in silence and ash. And still, something remained. Not haunting, not hunger, but presence. Like a lantern that had been snuffed, but whose smoke still traced shapes in the air. She had no dreams the night after the bell bled, but when she awoke on the 97th morning, the sound was there, faint, hollow, inside her. Not a toll, not a cry. A single note repeating beneath her breath, like a hymn with no language. A hum, steady, alive. She pressed her hand to her chest. There was no pain, only rhythm. It was not her heartbeat. It was something older, something borrowed. The house had grown quieter. Even the wind seemed to avoid her door. She swept the floor, folded the old funeral cloths, boiled water for tea, but every act echoed as if performed inside a room that remembered too much. When the kettle whistled, it whistled in the pitch of the bell. When the door creaked, it creaked in time with the hum in her chest. And when she whispered to herself, "He is gone," the walls replied, "He waits." She went to the garden. The white chrysanthemums still bloomed, untouched. She knelt before it and tried to pray, not for him, for herself. But no words came, only breath. And in the breath, the hum returned, louder now, not in her ears, in the air, as if the bell no longer lived in one place, but in all the places her grief had touched. At dusk, she walked to the temple again. The path was smooth now, no longer resisting her steps. The air smelled clean, too clean, as though something had burned through all memory. When she reached the top of the hill, she stopped. The bell was gone. The tower stood empty, its beams bare, its rafters wind-bitten. Nothing hung from the hook, nothing swayed. But still, the sound rang. Not once, not twice, but endlessly, quiet, internal,
a bell without a body. She stepped into the center of the circle where the bell once stood. She closed her eyes, and the sound swelled. It came from the ground, from the air, from inside her ribs. And in that moment, he was there, not as shadow, not as memory, but as presence. No body, no face, just warmth, just knowing. And she understood. He had never left, not truly, not because he refused, but because she still carried the sound, the echo of his name, the ache of unfinished conversation, the habit of lighting candles for someone who could no longer see. The bell was no longer metal. It was grief turned inward, and she had become its last chamber. She sat in the grass, folded her legs beneath her, and began to hum, low, gentle, not in mourning, in memory. And the sound within her began to mirror it, her hum, his hum, two voices that had once been two bodies, now one. The sky turned violet, the stars blinked awake, and the wind stirred through the trees. And May whispered, "I will not keep you." And the sound within her answered, "I am not kept." She opened her hands, pressed them to the earth, felt the hum pass into the ground, and the ground hummed back. It did not hurt, it did not pull, it did not ask anything of her. It only listened, and finally returned her breath, returned her silence, returned the parts of herself once buried beneath the bell. She rose with the night behind her and the dawn still waiting. The temple no longer held her. The altar no longer needed her. And the ringing, it was gone. For the first time, truly gone. She walked home, not hurried, not heavy, but whole. And behind her, where the bell had once hung, the wind moved gently through the beams, and it sounded like laughter, soft, familiar, a farewell that didn't need to be spoken.
It was the 100th morning, a number that felt round, final, sacred. In the village's oldest traditions, 100 days marked the end of mourning. After that, the living must stop calling the dead. After that, the soul finds its way home, or wanders if still remembered too much. May had never counted the days before. But when she opened her eyes and saw the chrysanthemum blooming wide in the garden, not one, but many, she knew. The story had circled back to its silence. She rose slowly. Her joints ached, not from age, but from release, the pain that comes when something heavy is finally put down. She dressed in white again, but this time not for grief, for closure, for the kind of reverence that speaks with the body, not the voice. And when she stepped outside, the sky was still. No wind, no birds, no distant toll. Even the world seemed to hold its breath. She walked through the village. People nodded to her, quiet but warm. No one mentioned the bell anymore. No one asked about the ash. No one remembered the nights when the ground breathed. And that, she thought, was how it should be. Some stories aren't meant to be carried by a village, only by the one who lived them. She climbed the temple steps one last time, not to pray, not to plead, just to stand, to face the place where the sound had once lived. The bell tower was empty, but the air still held its shape, like lungs remembering the weight of air. She stepped into the circle where the bell once hung. The earth was healed now. No cracks, no ash, only soft moss growing in a perfect ring. May stood in its center, closed her eyes, and waited. Not for him, not for the bell, but for herself. For the part of her that had waited too long for someone to return, for the silence that had become her inheritance. And then it happened. Not a sound, not a whisper, but a toll. One final toll, rising from somewhere deep beneath the hill. Soft, clear, perfect. A sound not of warning, not of mourning, but of release. She opened her eyes. There was no bell, no shadow. But the wind had returned. It kissed her cheek and moved through her hair, and in that breeze she felt it. Not his hand, not his voice, but his absence, finally full, finally right, finally no longer asking to be held. She breathed, and for the first time since the first toll, she felt alone without feeling broken. She stepped forward, and the moss did not bend. It welcomed her. She placed one hand to the empty beam above and whispered, "You can rest now." But the voice that came next was not his. It was hers, spoken back through memory. "You can too." She turned. The sun had begun to rise behind the hills, painting gold across the rooftops. The village breathed in mourning. Children laughed in the far distance. The world moved forward, and so did she. She walked down the steps without looking back, not once. Because some goodbyes are not meant to be spoken, only honored. At the foot of the hill, the garden waited. 100 white blooms now bowed in the breeze, and in the center of them, tied to a reed, hung a single bronze bell. Small, dented, old. The one the monk had once given her, the one that had kept her safe. It did not ring, but as she passed it, it trembled. Not from haunting, but from memory, from gratitude. She opened her home, sat by the window, folded her hands, and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, not to pray, but to be. And in that stillness, as the morning filled the walls with light, the great bell, the one the villagers had forgotten, the one that had not rung in many days, rang once more. Not in the temple, not in the ground, but in her name. And then, never again.